In 2020, the Zambian Ministry of Health began tracking causes of death across 33 districts, 45 hospitals, tens of thousands of deaths, a method called verbal autopsy, where researchers interview family members to establish what actually killed the person. They expected to confirm what everyone already knew, that Zambia's defining public health burden was HIV. Over the 4 years they tracked, HIV deaths did exactly what the data predicted. They fell from 11.2% of all deaths in 2020 to 7.5% by 2023. Antiretroviral therapy working as intended. But in those same 4 years, something else was happening that the models hadn't fully anticipated. Cardiac disease deaths rose from 18.7% to 25.4%, a jump so consistent and so statistically significant that the researchers published it in December 2025 as evidence that the entire pattern of what kills people in Zambia had shifted. They were tracking one transition and accidentally documented another. Zambia, roughly 21 to 22 million people, landlocked in the heart of southern Africa, bordered by 8 countries, including the DRC to the north and Zimbabwe to the south. Life expectancy sits at approximately 65 years, which sounds modest until you understand what it represents. A dramatic recovery from below 50 years in the early 2000s, driven almost entirely by antiretroviral therapy for HIV. That context matters for this episode. Zambia's identity in global health has been shaped entirely by one fact. It has one of the highest HIV prevalence rates in the world, 11.3% among adults aged 15 to 49. That's more than 1 in 10 adults living with the virus. Since the 1980s, HIV has defined this country's relationship with medicine, with foreign aid, with life expectancy, with how the world reports on Zambia's health. And it would be wrong to say that's changed. HIV is still killing roughly 15,000 Zambians a year. The system built to track, treat, and manage it, including a national electronic health record called SmartCare, originally designed in 2004 to capture individual HIV patient data, is still running. But here's what that system just revealed. The country it was built to serve has started dying from something else. Before we go through the data, here's your true or false. HIV is still the leading cause of community death in Zambia. Take a moment. Given what you just heard about Zambia's HIV burden, most people say true. The answer is false, and the study that proves it was published less than 7 months ago. The Zambian Ministry of Health's 33-district verbal autopsy study, published in PLOS One in December 2025, tracked 67,079 community deaths between 2020 and 2023. Across all deaths, people with HIV and without, the leading cause was cardiac disease at 22.1%. For people without HIV, cardiac disease caused 24.9% of deaths, followed by stroke at 8.5% and acute respiratory infections at 7.6%. For people with HIV, HIV/AIDS-related causes still led within that group at 50.4%, but cardiac disease was second, even among this population, at 13.1%. And here is the trend line that makes this more than a snapshot. Over the 4 years tracked, cardiac disease deaths rose from 18.7% to 25.4% of all deaths. HIV-related deaths fell from 11.2% to 7.5%. Both trends reached statistical significance, p less than 0.001, meaning this is not noise. This is a real, documented, rapidly accelerating shift. At the current rate of change, the gap between cardiac disease and HIV as community killers is not closing. It's widening. The crossover that researchers predicted might take a generation to complete happened fast enough to see within a single 4-year study. If you watched our Kenya episode, you already know the biology of hypertension and cardiac disease, the silent arterial damage, the years of high blood pressure without symptoms, the heart attack or stroke that arrives without warning. What's specific to Zambia isn't the biology. It's the speed and the context of the crossover. The 33-district study documented a shift of nearly 7 percentage points in cardiac deaths in 4 years, across 67,000 deaths with statistical certainty. 32.3% of HIV-negative people who died did so within 24 hours of being in regular health. More than 1 in 3 sudden deaths when more than 30% of cardiac profile deaths happen without prior warning. People aren't dying because they went undiagnosed for months and eventually deteriorated. They're dying because they were never diagnosed at all. Now look at the context. Where is cardiac disease highest? HIV prevalence in Zambia is highest in the urban provinces of Lusaka and Copperbelt. These are exactly the same provinces where NCD risk factors, sedentary work, processed food, salt, tobacco, are rising fastest, following the economic pattern of a Copperbelt economy that shifted from physical labor to office and retail work across one generation. The health system those urban populations interact with was designed and funded overwhelmingly around HIV and infectious disease. The SmartCare electronic health record, introduced in 2004, was built to track HIV patients. The clinical training, the supply chains, the community health worker programs, all oriented around HIV. HIV prevalence in women is nearly twice that of men, 13.9% versus 8.0% among adults 15 to 59. But men are more likely than women to die from AIDS-related illness because they are less likely to test and seek treatment. And men are also dying suddenly from cardiac events at a higher rate than women. Zambia's men are being killed by both the disease the health system was built for through late presentation and by the disease the health system wasn't built for through being entirely outside the detection net. To understand how Zambia got here, you need to follow two timelines that have been running simultaneously for 3 decades and are only now producing a result that surprised even the researchers watching them. The first timeline is HIV. In 1985, HIV prevalence among antenatal women in major Zambian cities was 5%. By 1992, it had reached 27% in urban areas. The epidemic was catastrophic and fast. Life expectancy collapsed to below 50 years. Then, antiretroviral therapy arrived. In 2004, the same year that SmartCare was launched, Zambia began providing free ART. The impact was measurable. Between 2010 and 2025, new HIV infections fell from 63,000 a year to 30,000. AIDS-related deaths fell by 73%, from 26,000 a year to 15,000. Life expectancy climbed from below 50 to 65 years in roughly 2 decades. The second timeline is urbanization and economic change. As the HIV epidemic was being beaten back, Zambia's cities were growing fast. The Copperbelt economy shifted. A population that had been doing physical labor became more sedentary. Diets changed. Salt consumption rose. Processed foods became cheaper and more accessible. All the risk factors for cardiovascular disease were accumulating quietly in the background, invisible to the health system that had been built and was still funded to fight HIV. And then, between 2020 and 2023, the 33-district study captured both timelines converging in a single dataset. HIV falling, cardiac rising, the crossover complete. In December 2025, when the researchers published these findings, they recommended interventions to strengthen the integrated management of non-communicable diseases in community settings across Zambia. It's the Ghana story. It's the Kenya story. And it's happening in Zambia faster than it happened in either of them. This is the 3rd consecutive episode in this series where we've documented the same pattern. A country once defined by its infectious disease burden crossing over to a chronic disease-dominated death profile, with a health system structurally unprepared for the transition. Ghana's NHIS was built for malaria and infectious disease, and it's being retrofitted for NCDs right now. Kenya's entire health apparatus was organized around HIV, and now cardiovascular disease is the leading killer. Zambia built SmartCare for HIV, and the 67,000 death study that SmartCare helped track just confirmed that cardiac disease is now the country's leading community cause of death. And unlike Ghana or Kenya, Zambia is doing this while its HIV burden is still among the world's highest, making the crossover more striking and more instructive than any previous episode in this series. There's also a warning in this episode's final numbers. Zambia faces a $367 million reduction in its 2025 PEPFAR budget and a $21 million cut under Global Fund reprioritization. Zambia is being asked to sustain a world-class HIV response that has saved hundreds of thousands of lives, while simultaneously building a new NCD response from scratch, with less money than it had last year. The disease that was declining may start rising again. The disease that was rising has no serious funding mechanism to address it. The crossover the data just confirmed may be the easiest part of what comes next. Next, we're going to Tanzania, a country that carries the world's third highest malaria death toll and almost never appears in global health journalism.